March 1941. North Atlantic, 400 miles west of Ireland. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Hartmann is commanding U-552, a Type 7C U-boat hunting Allied convoys in the mid-Atlantic. His submarine is submerged at 80 feet, moving slowly on electric motors, listening for the sounds of merchant ship propellers. The hydrophone operator reports distant engine noise. A convoy, perhaps 10 miles away. Perfect. Hartmann orders the boat to periscope depth to assess the target. But something is wrong. The hydrophone operator suddenly reports a new sound, a distinct ping echoing through the water. Then another. Then another. Regular pulses, like someone tapping metal underwater with precise rhythm. The sound is coming from the direction of the convoy's escorts. Hartmann doesn't understand what he's hearing. German naval intelligence has briefed U-boat commanders that British destroyers use hydrophones, passive listening devices that pick up submarine engine noise. Hydrophones are dangerous but manageable. You avoid them by running silent, by moving slowly on electric motors, by being quieter than the background ocean noise. But these pings aren't hydrophones. They're something active, something searching, and they're getting louder, which means whatever is making that sound is getting closer. The hydrophone operator's voice rises. The pings are reflecting off our hull. They know exactly where we are. Hartmann orders crash dive, emergency descent to 150 feet. But the pings follow them down. The destroyer above knows their depth, knows their position, is tracking them with precision that should be impossible. Minutes later, depth charges begin exploding around U-552. The destroyer is dropping them in patterns that bracket the submarine's position. Not random attacks hoping to get lucky. Systematic, calculated attacks by a ship that knows exactly where the U-boat is hiding. U-552 survives by diving deeper, by taking the submarine to depths that strain the pressure hull, by running silent for 2 hours until the destroyer finally gives up and returns to the convoy. When Hartmann surfaces that night and radios his report to U-boat headquarters, he includes a question that's becoming increasingly common in German naval communications. How are the British finding us underwater? The answer, though German intelligence won't fully understand it until much later, is ASDIC. The British call it that, an acronym from World War I that stands for Anti-Submarine Detection Investigation Committee. The technology uses sound waves transmitted through water to detect submerged submarines, measure their range and bearing, and guide depth charge attacks with accuracy that seems impossible to U-boat crews who've been trained that being underwater means being invisible. By 1943, ASDIC-equipped escorts will be destroying U-boats at rates that make submarine warfare unsustainable. The weapon that's supposed to starve Britain into surrender will instead become a death trap for German submariners, and the technology that makes this possible is something the Germans barely understand and consistently underestimate. This is the story of how sound became a weapon, how British scientists turned the ocean into a hunting ground where submarines couldn't hide, and how a technology developed in the aftermath of one world war became the decisive weapon in the next. To understand why ASDIC matters so much, you need to understand what U-boats are doing to Britain in 1940-1941. Germany's submarine force is strangling Britain's supply lines. Every week, convoys crossing the Atlantic from North America lose ships to torpedo attacks. The cargoes going to the bottom, food, fuel, raw materials, weapons, are things Britain desperately needs. The island nation imports roughly 55 million tons of supplies annually just to survive. Without those imports, Britain faces starvation and industrial collapse within months. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commanding the U-boat force, has perfected the Wolfpack tactic. Multiple submarines coordinate attacks on convoys, overwhelming the escorts, sinking merchant ships faster than British and American shipyards can replace them. The mathematics are brutal. If U-boats sink ships faster than they can be built, Britain loses the war regardless of what happens on land or in the air. The U-boat's greatest advantage is stealth. Submerged submarines are nearly invisible to surface ships using traditional methods. During daylight, a destroyer might spot a periscope if the sea is calm and lookouts are sharp. At night, submarines surface to recharge batteries and are essentially invisible unless you literally run into them. Hydrophones, the passive listening devices both sides use, can detect submarine engines, but only if the submarine is making noise. A U-boat running on electric motors at slow speed is quieter than the ambient ocean noise. The hydrophone operator hears waves, ship propellers, marine life, but not the submarine. Finding a quiet U-boat using hydrophones is like trying to find someone in a dark room by listening for their breathing while standing next to a highway. What British convoy escorts need is a way to find submarines that aren't making noise. A way to detect submerged U-boats that are running silent and invisible. Something that makes underwater hunting possible rather than a matter of luck. ASDIC provides that capability, but understanding how revolutionary this is requires knowing what came before. Before ASDIC, hunting submarines is mostly guesswork and desperation. A destroyer patrolling ahead of a convoy watches for periscopes breaking the surface. If someone spots one, and most submarine periscopes are only visible for seconds at a time, the destroyer turns toward it and accelerates to attack speed. The goal is to reach the periscope position and drop depth charges, barrels filled with 300 pounds of high explosive set to detonate at specific depths. But submarines underwater are maneuvering. By the time the destroyer reaches the position where the periscope was spotted, the U-boat has moved. It might have turned, changed depth, altered speed. The destroyer drops depth charges where the submarine was, not where it is. Most attacks miss by hundreds of yards. At night, submarines surface to recharge batteries. On the surface, they're effectively invisible. They're low in the water, painted dark, showing no lights. A submarine can be 500 yards from a destroyer and remain completely undetected. Lookouts scanning the darkness with binoculars see nothing. The submarine charges batteries, maybe attacks the convoy if it's in position, then dives before dawn. The few successful submarine kills before ASDIC are mostly luck. A destroyer happens to be in the right place when a submarine surfaces nearby. A lookout with exceptional vision spots a periscope at long range. A submarine makes a mistake, runs too shallow, leaves an oil slick, surfaces in the wrong location. But these successes are rare. Most U-boats operate with near impunity. Dönitz's wolf packs exploit this advantage ruthlessly. Multiple U-boats shadow a convoy, radioing position reports. At nightfall, they attack in coordinated strikes. Torpedoes hit merchant ships from multiple directions. Escorts race around trying to locate attackers they can't see. By the time morning comes, the U-boats have submerged and disappeared, and the convoy has lost 5, 10, sometimes 15 ships. British merchant seamen face horrifying odds. The casualty rate for merchant crews crossing the Atlantic approaches 25% in some periods. One voyage in 4, you don't come home. You either die when your ship is torpedoed, or you die of exposure in a lifeboat, or you die when your lifeboat is never found. The men sailing convoys know the mathematics, and they sail anyway because Britain needs those supplies. Destroyers and corvettes escorting convoys are nearly helpless to protect them. The escorts can drop depth charges randomly, hoping to get lucky. They can ram submarines if they spot them on the surface. They can rescue survivors from torpedoed ships. But actually finding and killing U-boats? That requires technology they don't have. Until ASDIC. ASDIC works on a principle that seems simple, but requires sophisticated engineering to implement. Send a pulse of sound into the water and listen for echoes bouncing back from solid objects. The basic concept is echolocation, the same principle bats use to navigate in darkness. But making it work underwater at ranges of thousands of yards requires solving problems that take years of engineering development. The transmitter is a transducer, a device that converts electrical energy into sound waves. Early ASDIC transducers use quartz crystals that vibrate when electrical current passes through them. These vibrations create pressure waves in the water, sound pulses that travel at approximately 4,800 feet per second through seawater. That's much faster than sound travels through air, which is why ASDIC can detect objects at long ranges. The transmitted pulse is a ping, a short burst of sound at a specific frequency, usually between 15 and 30 kHz. This is above the range of human hearing, but marine animals can hear it, and submarines with sensitive hydrophones definitely hear it. That distinctive ping becomes one of the most recognizable sounds of World War II for anyone who's been aboard a submarine under attack. When the ping hits something solid, like a submarine's steel pressure hull, some of the sound energy reflects back. The ASDIC receiver picks up this echo. The time between transmission and echo return gives the range. If the echo returns in 2 seconds, the target is 4,800 feet away. Sound travels there and back. The direction of the echo gives bearing. The strength of the echo provides information about the target's size. The ASDIC operator wears headphones, listening for echoes. A good operator learns to distinguish between submarines and false contacts. A submarine echo has a distinctive quality: sharp, metallic, reflecting strongly. Echoes from rocks, wrecks, or schools of fish sound different. Experienced operators develop an almost intuitive sense for what's a submarine and what's not. But ASDIC has limitations that U-boat commanders eventually learn to exploit. The sonar beam is narrow, maybe 15 degrees wide. The operator must manually train the transducer, sweeping it back and forth to search an area. A submarine directly ahead is easy to detect. A submarine off to the side might not be in the search beam. This creates blind spots that clever U-boat captains use to evade. ASDIC also struggles with depth determination. The echo gives range and bearing, but calculating depth requires triangulation or multiple measurements. A submarine at 50 feet and one at 200 feet might give similar echo returns if they're at the same horizontal range. Destroyers develop tactics for depth determination, but it's never as precise as range and bearing. Temperature layers in the ocean create acoustic shadows, zones where sound waves refract, creating areas ASDIC can't penetrate effectively. Skilled U-boat commanders learn to hide in these layers when possible. German naval intelligence eventually provides charts showing likely temperature layer depths in different ocean regions, turning oceanography into submarine survival tactics. Despite these limitations, ASDIC fundamentally changes submarine warfare. For the first time, surface ships can hunt submarines that are hiding underwater. The submarine's greatest advantage, invisibility when submerged, is compromised. Not eliminated, but compromised. And that's enough to change the mathematics of the Atlantic campaign. The first U-boat destroyed using ASDIC is U-31, sunk in March 1940 by HMS Salmon in the North Sea. The attack demonstrates both ASDIC's potential and its limitations. HMS Salmon detects U-31 on ASDIC at approximately 1,500 yards range. The destroyer closes, maintaining sonar contact despite U-31's evasive maneuvers. When range closes to 200 yards, Salmon drops a pattern of depth charges set to detonate at 150 feet, the estimated depth of the submarine based on sonar tracking. The depth charges explode. The sonar echo disappears. Oil and debris surface. U-31 is destroyed with all hands lost. The entire engagement from initial detection to confirmed kill takes approximately 20 minutes. For U-boat command, this is concerning but not yet alarming. One submarine lost to a new technology could be an anomaly. But the pattern repeats. April 1940. U-13 sunk by ASDIC-equipped destroyers. July 1940. U-51. September 1940. U-32. The losses are steady, and the engagement reports all mention destroyers that seem to know exactly where the submarines are hiding. German naval intelligence studies the reports and concludes that the British have developed some form of active detection system. They know it uses sound. U-boat hydrophone operators report the characteristic pings before attacks begin. But German assessment of ASDIC's capabilities is consistently wrong. German intelligence assumes ASDIC's maximum range is approximately 500–800 yards. The actual maximum detection range is over 2,500 yards in good conditions. German intelligence believes ASDIC struggles to maintain contact with maneuvering submarines. In reality, experienced ASDIC operators can track evasive U-boats with high reliability. German intelligence thinks depth determination is impossible with ASDIC. British destroyers are actually achieving reasonable depth estimates using acoustic analysis. These intelligence failures doom U-boat tactics. German commanders develop evasion techniques based on incorrect assumptions about ASDIC's capabilities. They execute maneuvers they think will break sonar contact, but actually don't. They dive to depths they believe are safe, but aren't. They trust in countermeasures that don't work as well as they think. Kapitän-Leutnant Hartmann, commanding U-552, survives his March 1941 encounter and spends the voyage home trying to understand what happened. His report describes a destroyer that tracked U-552's every movement despite crash dives, course changes, and running silent. The destroyer maintained contact for over 2 hours, dropping depth charges with accuracy that seems impossible without visual contact. U-Boat Command studies Hartmann's report, along with similar accounts from other commanders. They distribute tactical advisories suggesting techniques for evading ASDIC: sharp turns at high speed, diving below the thermocline layer, running silent at minimal speed, dropping noise-making decoys. Some of these tactics are effective. Most aren't as effective as U-boat commanders hope. Because the fundamental problem is that ASDIC works. Not perfectly, not infallibly, but well enough that destroyers equipped with it can find submarines that would otherwise be invisible. And finding submarines is the hard part of submarine hunting. Once you know where the submarine is, killing it is relatively straightforward. While German U-boat crews are learning about ASDIC the hard way, British destroyer crews are learning how to use it effectively. This becomes a race between submarine evasion tactics and surface ship hunting techniques. The Royal Navy establishes the Anti-Submarine Warfare School at HMS Osprey in Portland to train ASDIC operators. The training is intensive. Operators spend weeks learning to distinguish echoes, judge ranges, track moving targets. They practice on training submarines that simulate evasive maneuvers. The best operators develop almost supernatural skill at interpreting sonar returns. Leading seaman David Phillips, an ASDIC operator on HMS Hesperus, describes the experience. You learn to hear things in the echoes that aren't obvious at first. The quality of the return tells you about the target's aspect: bow on, stern on, or beam on. The Doppler shift tells you if it's moving toward or away from you. A good operator can track a submarine through evasive maneuvers by predicting what the commander will do next. You're not just listening to echoes. You're hunting a thinking enemy who's trying to outsmart you. Destroyer commanders develop attack procedures that maximize ASDIC effectiveness. The standard pattern is to detect the submarine at long range, 1,500 to 2,000 yards, and immediately alter course toward it. The destroyer closes at high speed while the ASDIC operator maintains contact. At 200-300 yards, the destroyer loses sonar contact. The submarine is too close, the sonar beam can't reach it. This is the blind zone. To compensate for the blind zone, destroyers use calculated attacks. The ASDIC operator tracks the submarine's course and speed up to the point of losing contact. The destroyer commander calculates where the submarine will be 20 to 30 seconds later when the destroyer reaches attack position. The destroyer drops depth charges in a pattern designed to bracket the submarine's predicted position. This sounds simple, but requires split-second timing and accurate navigation. If the submarine executes a crash dive or radical turn just before losing sonar contact, the calculated position will be wrong. If the destroyer's speed varies, or the helmsman doesn't execute the attack run perfectly, the depth charges miss. But when everything works correctly, experienced ASDIC operator, skilled destroyer commander, well-trained crew, the system is devastatingly effective. Commander Donald Macintyre, commanding HMS Hesperus, perfects these techniques and becomes one of the most successful U-boat hunters of the war. His tactics involve deliberate, methodical tracking. He doesn't rush attacks. He maintains sonar contact for as long as possible, studying the submarine's behavior, identifying the commander's patterns. Only when he's confident of the submarine's position and course does he attack. Macintyre's approach produces results. In March 1941, Hesperus detects U-100 commanded by Joachim Schepke, one of Germany's most successful U-boat aces. Macintyre tracks U-100 for 45 minutes, despite Schepke's aggressive evasive maneuvers. When Macintyre finally attacks, the depth charge pattern is perfectly placed. U-100 is destroyed. Schepke dies along with most of his crew. 2 days later, Macintyre hunts U-99 commanded by Otto Kretschmer, Germany's highest-scoring U-boat ace, with over 250,000 tons of Allied shipping sunk. The engagement lasts over 3 hours. Kretschmer tries everything: crash dives, silent running, decoys, radical course changes. Hesperus's ASDIC operator maintains contact through all of it. Eventually, facing battery exhaustion and certain death if he stays submerged, Kretschmer surfaces and surrenders. U-99 is scuttled, and Kretschmer becomes a prisoner of war. For the U-boat force, losing Schepke and Kretschmer in the same week is devastating. These aren't novice commanders. They're the elite, the aces, the men who've survived dozens of patrols and become legends. If ASDIC-equipped destroyers can hunt down and kill or capture the best submarine commanders Germany has, no U-boat is safe. German naval engineering responds to the ASDIC threat by developing countermeasures. Some work. Most don't work as well as hoped. Bold decoys. Canisters containing calcium hydride that release hydrogen bubbles when submerged, creating a false sonar target. The theory is that destroyers will attack the decoy while the submarine escapes. In practice, experienced ASDIC operators learn to distinguish bold decoys from submarines. The echo quality is different, the movement pattern is wrong. Bold becomes marginally useful, but not the game-changer Germany hopes for. Pillenwerfer, chemical decoys creating underwater bubbles. Similar concept to bold, but more sophisticated. These have limited effectiveness against skilled operators, but can confuse ASDIC in specific conditions, particularly when multiple decoys are deployed simultaneously. Rubberized coatings. U-boats receive coatings designed to absorb sonar pulses rather than reflecting them, essentially acoustic stealth. The coatings show promise in testing but prove unreliable in operational conditions. Seawater, pressure changes, and depth charge near misses damage the coatings, reducing effectiveness. By 1944, some U-boats are using these coatings with moderate success, but they're never the solution to the ASDIC problem. The schnorchel. Arguably, the most effective countermeasure is the schnorchel, a breathing tube allowing submarines to run diesel engines while submerged at periscope depth. This means U-boats can recharge batteries without surfacing, reducing their vulnerability to radar and visual detection. But it doesn't defeat ASDIC. A submarine at periscope depth is still detectable by sonar. The fundamental problem German engineers face is that ASDIC is based on physics that can't be easily countered. Sound travels through water. Submarines are solid objects that reflect sound. You can try to hide the reflection, but making a 750-ton steel submarine acoustically invisible is effectively impossible with 1940s technology. German doctrine adapts instead of trying to defeat ASDIC directly. U-boats are instructed to attack on the surface at night when possible. ASDIC can't find what isn't submerged. When submerged attacks are necessary, commanders are taught to attack quickly and withdraw immediately, minimizing the time escorts can track them. Dive deep when under attack, beyond the effective depth of depth charges if possible. These tactical adaptations are moderately effective, but don't solve the fundamental problem. Destroyers with ASDIC can find submarines that would otherwise be invisible, and finding is the hard part. By spring 1943, the battle between U-boats and ASDIC-equipped escorts reaches a crisis point that will determine the war's outcome. Dönitz has expanded the U-boat force to over 400 operational submarines. He's throwing everything into the Atlantic battle, hoping to sink ships faster than the Allies can replace them. March 1943 sees some of Germany's most successful convoy attacks. Over 100 merchant ships sunk, including devastating Wolfpack attacks on convoys SC-121 and HX-229. But the losses are unsustainable for the U-boat force itself. Allied escorts are now routinely equipped with ASDIC, and they're getting better at using it. The escort carriers provide air cover in mid-Atlantic, eliminating the safe zones where U-boats previously operated freely. Long-range patrol aircraft equipped with airborne radar can detect surfaced submarines. And crucially, escort numbers are increasing. Convoys that once had 2 or 3 escorts now have 6 or 8. May 1943 becomes Black May for the U-boat force. 41 U-boats are lost in a single month, more than Germany lost in the entire first year of the war. The losses are distributed across all types of boats and crews, from novices to experienced commanders. Many are destroyed by ASDIC-equipped escorts that detect them underwater, track them relentlessly, and kill them with depth charge patterns that give no escape. The breaking point comes when Dönitz analyzes May's casualty reports. The mathematics are horrifying. 41 U-boats lost represents roughly 10% of his operational force in a single month. At that attrition rate, the entire U-boat arm will be destroyed in less than a year. The men being lost are irreplaceable. Training takes over a year, and experienced commanders are dying faster than new ones can gain experience. On May 24, 1943, Dönitz makes the decision that effectively ends the Battle of the Atlantic. He withdraws U-boats from the North Atlantic convoy routes. The withdrawal is temporary in theory, pending development of better technology and tactics. In reality, it's an admission that the U-boat campaign has failed. The decision is influenced by many factors: escort carriers, long-range aircraft, increasing escort numbers, improved radar, better convoy tactics. But ASDIC is fundamental to all of them. Without ASDIC, destroyers and corvettes can't find submarines underwater. With ASDIC, they can. And that single capability tips the balance from German advantage to Allied victory. For U-boat crews, being hunted by ASDIC-equipped destroyers is psychologically devastating in ways that surface combat isn't. When a destroyer attacks, you hear the sonar pings through the pressure hull. Ping, ping, ping. Regular, relentless, getting louder as the destroyer closes. You know the destroyer knows exactly where you are. You know there's no hiding. The only question is whether you can evade the depth charges. Then the pings stop. The destroyer has lost sonar contact, which means it's directly overhead, which means depth charges are coming. You have maybe 10 to 15 seconds before the first explosions. The crew braces against whatever they can grab. The lights are already switched to red to preserve night vision in case you surface. The submarine is silent except for the hum of electric motors and the breathing of 44 men waiting to die. The explosions are beyond loud. They're physical. The pressure waves slam into the pressure hull like sledgehammers. Light bulbs shatter, instruments crack, men are thrown against bulkheads. The submarine groans, a metallic screaming as the hull absorbs stresses it wasn't designed for. Water pipes rupture, spraying seawater into compartments. Electrical systems spark and short out. If the depth charges are close enough, the hull might crack. Water floods in under enormous pressure. The submarine begins sinking beyond test depth, where the pressure hull will implode. The crew has minutes to surface or die. Many times, surfacing means being captured or machine-gunned by the destroyer. Staying submerged means drowning. Korvettenkapitän Peter Kremer, commanding U-333, survives multiple depth charge attacks and later describes the experience. You lose track of time. The attacks go on for hours. Each pattern of explosions feels like it should be the one that kills you. Your crew looks at you for reassurance, but there's no reassurance to give. The destroyer overhead knows where you are. It's only a question of whether your boat can take another pattern, another series of explosions. Some boats survive, most don't. For Royal Navy escort crews, ASDIC operations are grinding, exhausting work. ASDIC operators spend hours in darkened compartments, headphones on, listening for echoes. The concentration required is intense. One missed echo could mean a submarine escapes, torpedoes more ships, kills more merchant seamen. Leading seaman Phillips describes the responsibility. When you're tracking a submarine, you know that if you lose contact, people die. Maybe not immediately, maybe not obviously, but if that U-boat escapes, it will sink ships. Every merchant ship that goes down takes 30-40 men with it. That's on you if you miss the echo, if you lose the track, if you give bad information to the captain. The pressure is constant. The statistical reality is brutal for both sides. U-boat survival rates plummet as ASDIC effectiveness improves. In 1939-1940, a U-boat commander could reasonably expect to survive multiple patrols. By 1943, survival odds dropped below 50%. Of the approximately 40,000 men who serve in U-boats during the war, 28,000 die, a 70% casualty rate that's the highest of any military service in any country during World War II. ASDIC's principles evolve into modern sonar systems that remain fundamental to naval warfare today. The basic concept, using sound to detect underwater objects, proves so effective that it becomes standard on every warship. Modern navies use active sonar, the descendant of ASDIC, and passive sonar, the descendant of hydrophones, in sophisticated combinations. The technology is vastly more advanced. Digital processing, multiple frequencies, computer-assisted analysis, but the physics are the same. The anti-submarine warfare doctrines developed around ASDIC-shaped naval tactics for the rest of the 20th century. The Cold War submarine versus anti-submarine forces dynamic is essentially an evolved version of U-boats versus ASDIC escorts, played out with nuclear submarines and guided missiles instead of diesel boats and depth charges. Modern submarines use acoustic stealth, rubberized coatings, quiet machinery, sound damping systems, specifically to counter sonar. These technologies are direct descendants of the World War II German attempts to defeat ASDIC. They're much more sophisticated, but based on the same principles. Reduce your acoustic signature. Make detection harder. The technology transfer after World War II spreads ASDIC knowledge globally. The US Navy adopts and improves British sonar systems. The Soviet Navy captures German submarine technology and develops its own sonar countermeasures. The acoustic warfare race that starts in 1940 continues through the Cold War and into the present. The numbers tell the story of ASDIC's impact on the Battle of the Atlantic, 1939 to 1941, before widespread ASDIC deployment. U-boats sink approximately 1/400 merchant ships. Allied escorts sink approximately 90 U-boats. Ratio: 15.6 merchant ships lost per U-boat sunk. 1942-1943, ASDIC deployment expanding. U-boats sink approximately 1,600 merchant ships. Allied escorts sink approximately 240 U-boats. Ratio: 6.7 merchant ships lost per U-boat sunk. 1944-1945, ASDIC widespread and mature. U-boats sink approximately 400 merchant ships. Allied escorts sink approximately 250 U-boats. Ratio: 1.6 merchant ships lost per U-boat sunk. The improving ratio shows ASDIC's cumulative effect. Early war, each U-boat sunk requires Germany to sacrifice roughly 16 merchant ships. By late war, the ratio inverts. Destroying a U-boat costs Germany more than the submarine sinks. The mathematics shift from Germany winning the attrition battle to Germany losing it catastrophically. Total U-boats destroyed by ASDIC-equipped surface escorts, approximately 250 out of 785 total U-boat losses. ASDIC isn't the only anti-submarine weapon, but it's fundamental to surface ship kills, which represent the largest single category of U-boat losses. The technology that Kapitän-Leutnant Hackmann couldn't understand in March 1941, those mysterious pings that tracked U-552 through desperate evasive maneuvers, proves to be one of the decisive technologies of the war. Not dramatic like radar or atomic weapons, but effective. Fundamentally, devastatingly effective at solving the problem of finding submarines underwater. German U-boat crews learn to fear the ping. That distinctive sound means a destroyer knows exactly where you are, is tracking your every move, is preparing to kill you with depth charges you can't evade. The psychological impact of being hunted by an enemy who can find you when you thought you were invisible. That breaks the U-boat force as much as the physical destruction. By 1945, when the war ends, ASDIC has helped sink a quarter of all U-boats lost and has made submarine warfare untenable in the North Atlantic. The weapon that was supposed to starve Britain into submission instead becomes a death trap for the men who crew it. And the technology that makes this possible, sound waves in water, echoes bouncing off steel hulls, skilled operators interpreting acoustic returns, proves that sometimes the decisive weapon isn't the most dramatic one. Sometimes it's the one that solves a fundamental problem: how to find an enemy who's hiding in three-dimensional space where visual detection is impossible. ASDIC finds submarines. And finding them is the hard part. Everything else follows from that.